Hello, my name is Lisa, and I never thought I would be telling this story. Honestly, I never even believed things like this could happen. But after what I experienced, I have no choice. The world needs to know the truth. One moment, I was alive, breathing, scrolling through my phone, completely unaware that everything was about to change. And then, in an instant, I was gone. I crossed over. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. There was no warning, no time to prepare. Just a sudden, overwhelming sense that I had left everything behind. But as I stood in that place, somewhere between life and eternity, I realized I wasn't alone. And then, I saw him, Jesus, the presence, the light, the overwhelming love. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. But what he showed me, what he revealed about immigrants, about the world, about the truth we've all been blind to, it shattered everything I thought I knew. And now I have to share it, because once you hear this, you'll never look at the world the same way again. I thought I knew what life was about. But after what I saw, I realized everything I believed was a lie. It was just another Monday morning. At least, that's what I thought. I woke up to the familiar sound of my alarm buzzing beside me, its insistent beeping cutting through the haze of sleep. The room was still dark, save for the faint glow of streetlights sneaking through the blinds. I groaned, reaching over to silence the noise, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. It was a feeling I had grown used to, one that had become as familiar as the morning coffee I was about to make. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I lived alone, so silence wasn't unusual. But that morning it felt different, heavier, like something unseen was lingering in the air, pressing against my chest. I shook off the thought and swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet meeting the cold floor. Maybe I was just tired. For a split second, I felt like I wasn't alone in the room, but when I looked around, nothing. I had been thinking a lot lately, about life, about purpose, about whether everything I had worked so hard for even mattered. I wasn't very religious, but I knew enough about God and His Son. I respected people who had faith, but for me, the idea of some divine presence guiding our lives felt somewhat distant, unreal. Growing up, my parents never pushed any kind of belief on me, and I never felt the need to go out of my way to be a true believer. The world was chaotic, unpredictable, and often cruel. If there was a God, I didn't see much evidence of Him intervening. I made my way to the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the dimly lit room. I reached for the coffee maker, going through the motions of my morning routine without much thought. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as I leaned against the counter, staring blankly at my phone. News updates, bills, a message from work reminding me about an upcoming meeting. It was all routine, all predictable. But something was different that day. I could feel it, even if I couldn't explain it. As I took my first sip of coffee, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. Not pain exactly, but a kind of pressure. Anxiety, maybe. I had been dealing with a lot lately. Work was demanding, the world seemed more unstable by the day, and on top of everything I had been feeling lost. Not in the way most people mean when they say that. I wasn't confused about my life, my job, or my relationships. I had all of those things figured out, at least on the surface. But there was a deeper kind of lostness, an emptiness I couldn't quite name. I had tried to ignore it, tried to push it aside with work, distractions, the never-ending cycle of daily responsibilities. But that morning, it was as if all of those walls I had built up were starting to crack. I glanced out the window. The city was already awake. Cars moving in steady lines, people heading off to jobs, to obligations, to lives that probably felt just as routine as mine. I wondered how many of them felt the same way, like something was missing, but they couldn't quite put their finger on what. Shrugging off the thought, I turned back to my coffee and forced myself to focus on the day ahead. I had work. I had things to do. That was all that mattered. At least that's what I told myself. I didn't know it then, but that was the last ordinary morning I would ever have. I left my apartment around 8 a.m., the chill of the morning air waking me up more than the coffee ever could. The streets were bustling with life, people in business suits rushing past, teenagers with backpacks slung over their shoulders, an elderly woman feeding pigeons on the corner. It was a scene I had witnessed 1,000 times before, and yet something about it felt surreal that day, like I was watching my own life play out from the outside. I shook off the eerie sensation and focused on the day ahead. Work was going to be busy, meetings stacked one after another. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder of a deadline I had almost forgotten about. I was halfway down the block when I saw him. A man sitting on the sidewalk, bundled up in a tattered coat. His face was weathered, his eyes tired, homeless. Another part of the city's landscape that people had learned to ignore. I had seen him before, I was sure of it. He was always on that same corner, always sitting there as people walked past without a second glance. I had never spoken to him. I had never even thought about speaking to him. But that morning, something made me stop. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me. Not begging, not desperate, just watching, like he was waiting for something. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment it felt like time slowed down. Then he spoke. "You look lost." The words hit me harder than they should have. I frowned, startled, but before I could respond, he smiled, a small, knowing smile, and looked away. I hesitated. My instinct was to keep walking, to brush it off as just another strange encounter in a city full of them. But something about that moment stayed with me. I kept walking, my thoughts unsettled, the chill in the air suddenly feeling sharper against my skin. I didn't know it yet, but that man, that one random encounter, it was a warning, a sign, and I had ignored it. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, emails, and the constant hum of deadlines creeping closer. But no matter how busy I got, something wouldn't leave me alone. That man, his eyes, his words. "You look lost." Hours later, I could still hear his voice. It wasn't just a sentence, it was a weight, a warning, a message I had ignored. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. But deep down, a part of me wondered, had he seen something in me that I couldn't see myself? I didn't have an answer, and by the time the day ended, I was too exhausted to think about it any further. I made my way home, the sky turning a deep shade of orange as the sun set behind the buildings. The city was alive with its usual evening energy, cars honking, street vendors calling out, music drifting from open windows. I unlocked my apartment door, stepped inside and exhaled. Another day, gone. Another day of the same routine, the same cycle, the same quiet emptiness lurking beneath it all. I didn't know it then, but I was standing on the edge of something I could never have imagined. Because in just a few short hours, my life would change forever. And nothing would ever be the same again. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, the blue light making my eyes ache. The next, my world was splitting apart. It hit me out of nowhere, a sharp, piercing pain in my chest, like an iron fist clamping down on my ribs. It felt like the pain from earlier in the morning, but stronger. At first I thought it was nothing. Maybe a cramp, maybe stress. I'd had long days before, this was just exhaustion, right? But then, the pain worsened. It wasn't just discomfort. There was something wrong. A deep, unnatural pressure spreading like wildfire, locking me in place. I sucked in a breath, or tried to, but my lungs wouldn't work. The air caught in my throat, my body refusing to listen to me. A wave of dizziness crashed over me, my vision blurred. Black spots danced across my sight like ink bleeding through paper. Something was happening, something bad. I frantically reached for my phone to call 911. My fingers trembled, clumsy, useless. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, fast and erratic, like a drum being pounded too hard, too fast. The phone fell to the floor as I tried to sit up. Pain ripped through me. My limbs felt heavy, foreign, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Panic kicked in, pure and primal. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. I was young. I was healthy. People like me don't just drop dead, right? But my body didn't care about logic. My body was shutting down. The pain grew sharper, stabbing deep into my chest, like a knife twisting into my heart. I gasped. Nothing. No air. No relief. And then, the cold. It crept in slowly at first. A strange numbness tingling in my fingertips, seeping up my arms, down my legs. Then it deepened. A bone-chilling, unnatural cold that wrapped around me like an invisible force, pulling me downward. I wasn't just in pain anymore. I was dying. I knew it. I could feel it. The realization sent shockwaves through my mind. My thoughts exploded in a chaotic frenzy, a storm of memories and regrets, unfinished conversations and things left unsaid. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I had too much left to do, too much life left to live. But my body didn't care. The pain faded, but that was worse. My limbs stopped shaking, but that was worse. My heartbeat slowed, weaker, weaker, weaker. And then, it stopped. Everything stopped. A crushing silence swallowed me whole. No pain, no sound, no breath, just darkness. And for a terrifying, impossible moment, I was nothing. Then I opened my eyes. But I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it. I could see myself, my own motionless form lying there, still, silent, lifeless. For a split second, my mind refused to accept it. That wasn't me. It couldn't be me. I was right here, floating, watching. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I should have been. But instead I felt light, weightless. I turned, or at least I thought I did. It was strange, being weightless, having no real sense of movement. There was no resistance, no effort. I simply shifted. Below me, the room remained unchanged. My apartment exactly as I had left it. The bed, the crumpled sheets, my phone screen still glowing dimly on the floor. The world kept going, but I wasn't in it anymore. I should have panicked, but I didn't, because something else was happening, something I couldn't explain. I knew I should feel something about this. Panic, terror, a desperate urge to fight, to scream, to force myself back into that unmoving form. But I didn't, because a strange calmness had settled over me. It wasn't numbness, it wasn't shock. It was something deeper, something I can still not describe. As I hovered there, suspended in an impossible space, just above my bed, just outside of time itself. My body, the room, the familiar reality I had always known. They all seemed distant now, like echoes of a life I had already left behind. And then, I heard it. A hum. It started low, soft, barely noticeable, but as I focused, I realized it wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration, a deep, resonant energy that filled everything. The air around me, the space between atoms, even the silence itself, it all pulsed with this invisible frequency. And then I felt it. Something was pulling me upward, not hands, not gravity, something else. a force beyond my understanding, beyond physics, beyond anything I had ever experienced in my human body. It wasn't scary or painful, but I somehow knew it was inevitable. A gentle yet powerful force, like a current in an unseen ocean, carried me higher, faster, effortlessly. I looked down one last time. My body remained still, my room unchanged, but I knew I was no longer part of that world. I had crossed over, and there was no going back. As I rose, the world below me vanished. The walls of my apartment melted away. The furniture, the floor, the very earth itself, they all dissolved into a vast and endless blackness. But this wasn't an empty void. The darkness had depth. It stretched in every direction, infinite, endless, yet strangely comforting. I wasn't afraid, because I wasn't alone. Far above me a light appeared, faint at first, a pinprick in the distance, but the more I rose, the more it expanded, growing, glowing, calling. It wasn't just a light. It was alive. It pulsed with a warmth I could feel, even without a body. It radiated something I had never encountered before, a love so complete, so absolute, that it wrapped around me like the arms of a long-lost home. And as I moved toward it, something else became clear. I wasn't just floating, I was being drawn, as if every fiber of my soul had always been connected to this place, like a magnet finally returning to its source. And then the memories came, not of my life, but of something before my life. Something I had forgotten, something I was never supposed to remember. I had been here before, and I would be here again. This place, it wasn't foreign, it wasn't strange. It felt like home. The closer I got to the light, the more I could feel it. The hum I had heard before wasn't just a sound, it was a voice. 1,000 voices, 1,000,000, singing, speaking, resonating with truths too vast for human language to hold. I wasn't just hearing it. I was becoming part of it. And then, just as I reached the threshold of that impossible brilliance, I stopped. Or rather, I was stopped. Not by force, not by command, but by something greater. I looked ahead, into the infinite light, and in that moment I knew I was not alone. Something was there. Someone. I couldn't see clearly yet. The light was too overwhelming, too powerful, like staring into the heart of a star. But I could feel him. His presence was unlike anything I had ever known, vast and eternal, yet so personal, so near, as if he had been waiting for me this entire time. And in that instant, I realized something that shook me to my core. I was standing before Jesus. A flood of emotions washed over me, awe, reverence, a deep, unshakable understanding that nothing in my life had ever been as real as this moment. This was not a dream, not a hallucination. This was the truth. And the truth was alive. His presence wasn't just felt, it was experienced. I was being seen, fully, completely. Every thought, every mistake, every hidden fear. And yet, there was no condemnation. I didn't need to ask who he was. I knew, and I also knew this. He knew me. Every part of me, everything I had ever done, everything I had ever failed to do. And still, he was here. Still, he called me forward. Still, he welcomed me. And as I stood in the presence of the infinite, I finally understood what it meant to be truly, completely alive. Everything else faded away. The tunnel, the darkness, the distant echo of voices calling me back. None of it mattered anymore. Because at that moment, standing before me, was him. A presence so overwhelming, so impossibly real, that I could hardly process it. It wasn't just that he was there. It was the way he filled everything, the space around us, the very air, the core of my being. Light didn't just surround him. It radiated from him, as if his very existence was the source of all light itself. And yet, that light wasn't just brightness. It was alive. It moved. It pulsed, shifting through colors more vibrant than anything I'd ever seen on earth. I knew, without a doubt, that I was standing before Jesus. His presence was beyond words. I had imagined him before, in my rare visits to the church, in paintings, in whispered prayers as a child. But none of those images, not a single one, came close to what I was seeing now. In an instant, I saw it all. My life, my choices, every moment where I had turned away from something greater. His face was both familiar and unfamiliar, beyond human but not alien. His eyes, oh, his eyes. They held galaxies within them, depths that stretched beyond eternity. I had never seen such power, such wisdom, such love. But there was something else too, something that made my soul tremble. He could see me, not just my form, not just my presence. Mr. Every thought, every moment of my life, every hidden sin, every unspoken doubt, every act of kindness I had forgotten about. They were all laid bare before him. I should have been terrified, ashamed, desperate to hide. But instead, I felt love. A love deeper than anything I had ever known. Not just acceptance, something far greater. It was as if he had seen the very worst of me and still delighted in my existence. I felt no condemnation, no rejection. Only a love so vast it could have consumed the entire universe. Yet here it was, focused entirely on me. And then he spoke. But it wasn't just words. His voice didn't just enter my ears, it resonated through me. Every syllable vibrated in my chest, my bones, my very essence. The moment he spoke, I knew that his words were absolute truth. There was no questioning them, no analyzing, no doubt. Lisa, you are not here by accident. It wasn't just a statement. It was a revelation, like layers of reality peeling back, revealing the deeper truth underneath. I tried to respond, but before I could form the words, a wave of understanding hit me. I saw it all. My life, from the very beginning, stretching out before me like a golden thread in an infinite tapestry. Every choice I had made, every path I had taken, every moment where I had felt lost, abandoned, forgotten, he had been there. Even when I thought I was alone, even in my lowest moments, even in the times I had denied him, he had never left me. I fell to my knees, or at least it felt like I did. Did I even have a body here? I didn't know. It didn't matter. The weight of his presence was enough to bring me to the ground, not from fear, but from awe. Tears streamed down my face, or maybe they didn't. I couldn't tell anymore. Everything in this place was more real than the reality I had known before, yet at the same time, it was beyond physical sensation. Jesus. The name barely escaped my lips. It wasn't a question. I knew who he was. But saying it, truly speaking his name in his presence, felt like an act of worship. He looked at me, and in that instant, I felt the weight of eternity. I was about to speak again when, suddenly, visions flooded my mind. Not in the way memories come, not like a dream or a thought. These were alive, more vivid than reality itself. It was as if I was being transported into moments that had already happened, moments that were happening, and moments that had yet to come, all at the same time. I saw creation. The moment the universe was spoken into existence, not just as an explosion of light, but as a song. Every star, every planet, every atom vibrated with the music of his voice. I saw people, not just their faces, but their souls, beautiful, radiant, woven from the very light of God. Each one a masterpiece, each one bearing his image. And then I saw the suffering. I gasped as the vision shifted. Wars, bloodshed, Families torn apart, people screaming, crying, begging for mercy. I saw oppression, the powerful crushing the weak, children starving, nations built on greed and violence, and worst of all, I saw people turning away from him. They were right there, his hand extended toward them, and yet they refused. Some out of pride, some out of fear, some because they had been told lies about who he was. And my heart broke, because in that moment I understood this is not how it was meant to be. I turned to him, desperate, confused. Why? His expression was filled with sorrow, not anger, not frustration, pure sorrow. Because they do not know me, he said. They have been deceived. Suddenly, there was another shift, and I saw them. Millions of people, some walking for miles in the scorching heat, some huddled together in makeshift camps, some crossing oceans, risking everything for a chance at something better. Immigrants, refugees, the displaced. I saw their struggles, the way they were treated, the fear in their eyes as they were turned away, as countries turned them away and labeled them illegal aliens and invaders, as they were called, burdens. And then I saw how heaven saw them. They glowed with the same divine light I had seen in the first vision. They were precious, beloved, not a problem to be solved, not an issue to be debated, but souls. Jesus' voice filled me once more. The world has rejected them, but I have not. The weight of his words crushed me. Every excuse I had ever heard, every justification for indifference or cruelty toward the stranger, it all crumbled in an instant. Because standing here before the King of Kings, I realized the truth. These were his people, and the way the world treated them was the way it treated him. I saw something else too, a great reversal, a moment when the last would be first, when those cast aside would be honored, a kingdom not of this world, but one that would soon break into it. I looked at him, desperate to understand what he wanted me to do. His eyes burned with urgency. Tell them. And just like that, the vision faded. The brilliance of his presence dimmed. I felt something pulling me back toward my body, back toward the world I had known before. But I was not the same, because I had seen Jesus, and I knew that I could never be silent again. I was still reeling from my encounter with Jesus, my soul trembling under the weight of his words. Tell them. That command echoed within me, reverberating through every fiber of my being. But tell them what? I barely had time to process before the visions returned, this time even more vivid, more overwhelming. I wasn't just seeing history unfold, I was being thrust into it, as though I was standing in the very midst of time itself. I was about to witness something that would change everything. The first thing I saw was a land untouched by destruction, a place so vibrant, so pure, that it almost hurt to look at. Lush fields stretched endlessly, shimmering with colors more alive than anything I had ever seen on Earth. Rivers of crystal clear water wove through the landscape, reflecting a golden sky that seemed to sing with the very breath of God. And then I saw them, the first people. They were unlike anything I had imagined. Glorious, radiant, the divine spark of God himself burning within them. I realized something in that moment. This was the world as it was meant to be. There was no division, no suffering, no fear. These people were truly free. But then, a shadow. It slithered into the scene, unseen yet felt, corrupting the perfection with whispers of doubt, fear, separation. And suddenly, everything shifted. The world that had once been whole fractured. The people, once united, were now scattered, pushed apart by fear, greed, and power. It was in that moment that I understood. Division was never God's plan. The world had been broken by lies. And among the greatest of those lies was the one that convinced humanity to fear the stranger, to turn away from the foreigner, to build walls instead of bridges. And as the vision continued, I saw how that lie spread. I was swept forward through time, watching civilizations rise and fall. Empires were built, lands were conquered, and people were displaced. Again and again, I saw the same cycle. The strong pushing out the weak. The powerful hoarding what was never meant to be theirs alone. Borders drawn with blood and greed, not love and unity. I saw rulers justify their conquests in the name of safety, prosperity, even faith. But the truth was clear. God had never ordained this. And yet the world convinced itself that these divisions were normal, necessary. I saw nations grow strong by exploiting those they deemed unworthy. I saw laws written to exclude, policies designed to keep the immigrants out. And worst of all, I saw how many of those who claimed to follow Jesus took part in it. Then another shift. I saw the faces of immigrants, men, women, and children, throughout history. I saw them fleeing war, poverty, persecution, seeking refuge in lands that promised hope, but delivered rejection. And then I saw something that shook me to my core. As these desperate souls approached borders, pleading for mercy, I saw something moving behind them. Jesus. He was walking with them, carrying their burdens, holding their hands, weeping when they were turned away. And yet, so few recognized him. The vision slowed. I found myself standing once again before Jesus. His eyes held sorrow beyond words. "They have been lied to," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of eternity. I opened my mouth to ask who, but before I could, I knew. The world, the church, the governments, the people who believed they were righteous, yet ignored the cries of the suffering. Jesus spoke again, and what he said next shattered everything I thought I knew. "I was a foreigner, and you did not welcome me." The words struck like lightning, searing through my soul. It was then that I understood. Every time the world rejected an immigrant, they were rejecting him. Every time they turned away from the stranger, they turned away from Jesus himself. I trembled, my mind reeled. This truth was too big, too radical, too opposite of what so many had been taught. And yet, it was undeniable. Jesus had been an immigrant, born into a people oppressed by Rome, forced to flee as a child to Egypt to escape death. A wanderer, a stranger, never truly welcomed by the world he came to save. And even now, he walked with those who were cast out. The vision expanded, revealing something even more shocking. I saw a day in the future, the day of reckoning. Multitudes stood before the throne of Christ, waiting to hear his judgment. And then his voice thundered across eternity. "When I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was thirsty, you did not give me drink. When I was a stranger, you did not welcome me." Cries of protest rose. "Lord, when did we see you as a stranger?" And his answer sent shudders through all who heard it. "Whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me." There was silence as the weight of that truth settled over the crowd, crushing the illusions they had built for themselves. And then, the great reversal took place. The ones the world had deemed unworthy, the outcasts, the poor, the refugees, were lifted up, and those who had spent their lives in comfort, turning away from the suffering of others, found themselves outside the gates, weeping. I gasped, my heart pounding. This was real. This was coming, and so many were not ready. I turned to Jesus, overwhelmed. "What do I do?" His expression was both tender and urgent. "Tell them," he said again, "before it is too late." The world had been deceived. It had built kingdoms on greed and division, forsaking the laws of the kingdom of heaven. but time was running out. I felt the urgency in his voice. This message wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. Because soon the world would be shaken, borders would collapse, nations would fall, and only those who had built their foundation on love, not fear, would stand. The vision began to fade. I felt myself pulled backward, away from the brilliance of his presence, back toward the life I had left behind. But as I was pulled away, I heard his voice one last time. Tell them the truth. And then, darkness. I gasped as I felt slammed into my body, my lungs burning, my body jerking back to life. I was back, but I was not the same, because I had seen what was coming, and I knew I had to warn the world. I woke up gasping for air. For a moment I wasn't sure if I was alive or still trapped in that otherworldly realm where Jesus had revealed the truth to me. The weight of his words still pressed against my chest, an unbearable pressure that felt both urgent and terrifying. "Tell them," he had said, "before it is too late." I sat up, my body trembling, sweat soaking my sheets. My mind raced, trying to grasp what had just happened. Had I really seen Jesus? Had I really been shown the future? Had I really witnessed the great reversal, the moment when the world would be judged for how it treated the least among us? The weight of it crushed me. How could I tell them? How could they possibly believe me? I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, it was all a dream, a hallucination. But deep down, I knew this was real, and that meant I had to speak. But when I tried to tell people what I had seen, they didn't want to hear it. I thought they would be shaken like I was. I thought they would ask questions, feel the urgency, maybe even cry the way I did when I first woke up. Instead, laughter, eye rolls, dismissal. You were dreaming. Maybe you had too much to drink. You're just looking for attention. People I loved, friends, family, even those who called themselves believers, shut me down. At first I was hurt. Then I was confused. How could they not feel the weight of this? How could they not see the truth? I tried again. I spoke softly, then boldly. I shared scripture, I pleaded. But the more I spoke, the more resistance I faced. I was called a liar, a lunatic, a deceiver, even in churches, especially in churches. That's not biblical. Jesus wouldn't say that. You're being misled. People stopped talking to me. Some blocked me. Others whispered behind my back. I was losing relationships for speaking the truth. I was drained, tired of the disbelief, tired of the mockery, tired of feeling like I was carrying a burden too heavy for one person. The irony. The same people who claimed to love Jesus were the first to reject the very message he gave me. And then the attacks got worse. It started small, almost too small to notice. My phone screen glitched the first time I tried to type out my experience. The words appeared jumbled, scrambled, then the screen went black. Strange. I restarted it. It worked fine again. Probably nothing. But then my emails started disappearing. Messages I had written to close friends, trying to tell them even a fragment of what I had seen. Gone. Entire paragraphs erased without explanation. At first, I blamed my phone. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was some weird software bug. But then, things started happening that couldn't be explained. My computer would shut off the moment I tried to write down my experience. My voice recordings would sometimes get corrupted when I overshared about my experience. I tried posting online. Nothing would upload. It was as if someone, did not want this message getting out. And then, it got worse. The first night it happened, I chalked it up to exhaustion. I had barely slept since my return, my mind replaying the visions over and over again. So when I heard whispers outside my window, I told myself it was just the wind, until I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. My stomach dropped. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was past midnight. My neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. I held my breath, listening. Something was out there. I reached for my phone, but just as I did, the power went out. The hum of my bedside lamp died. My fan stopped. My phone screen went black. The entire house was swallowed in an unnatural silence. And then, in the corner of my room, I saw it. A shadow, not cast by anything, not belonging to anything. It was standing there, watching me. A paralyzing cold spread through my body. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. My limbs felt like lead, my breath shallow. The shadow moved. It wasn't like a normal shadow. It didn't flicker or stretch. It shifted, almost as if it were alive. A voice slithered into my mind, low and taunting. "You will not speak." I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. Terror, unlike anything I had ever felt, gripped me. I knew what this was. This wasn't just fear. This was something demonic. I had disturbed something. By seeing what I saw, by hearing what I heard, I had become a threat. And now, it wanted to silence me. But then there was a flicker of light. It was faint at first, but then I saw it. A glow forming at the edge of the room. And then a presence, warmth, strength. And then a voice. "Do not be afraid." The moment I heard those words, the paralysis broke. I gasped, sucking in a breath, my body jolting with power. My limbs loosened, my voice returned. And suddenly, I was praying out loud, not in fear, but in authority. "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave." The shadow recoiled. For the first time, I felt its presence weaken. It hissed, actually hissed, as if the name of Jesus was fire against it. I said it again. "Jesus Christ is Lord. You have no power here." And just like that, it was gone. The darkness lifted. The room was normal again. But I knew this was only the beginning. From that night on, I understood. This was spiritual warfare. This wasn't just about me telling my story. This was about something far bigger. A battle between truth and deception, light and darkness. I wasn't just being attacked because of what I had seen. I was being attacked because the truth about immigrants was a direct threat to the kingdom of darkness. For centuries, the world had been controlled by lies, that some people were more valuable than others, that borders and nations mattered more than human lives, that wealth and comfort were worth more than compassion. And I had seen, with my own eyes, that these lies were not just human-made. They were engineered, orchestrated, by something dark, by something that wanted the world to stay divided. Because as long as humanity was divided, as long as we feared the stranger, as long as we turned our backs on the ones Jesus walked with, the kingdom of darkness won. But Jesus had revealed the truth to me, and now I had a choice: to stay silent, to live in fear, or to speak no matter the cost. Even after that first attack, the resistance continued. I slowly noticed as friends distanced themselves. "Maybe you're just imagining things," they said. My posts would vanish. Sometimes I would wake up to scratches on my arms, bruises I couldn't explain. But every time I prayed, every time I called upon the name of Jesus, I felt his presence push back the darkness. I realized something. The more they tried to silence me, the louder I had to be. Because this wasn't just about me. This was about every immigrant who had been rejected, every refugee who had been turned away, every stranger who had been treated like an enemy instead of a brother or sister in Christ. I had seen what was coming. The world was on the edge of something huge. The shaking had already begun. And Jesus was calling his people to wake up. One night as I prayed, I felt Jesus speak to my heart again. The battle is not against flesh and blood. I understood now. This wasn't about governments, policies, politics. This was about souls. The enemy had convinced the world to fear the wrong things, to see people as threats instead of brothers and sisters, to divide what God had meant to be one family. And now, time was running out, because soon the world would be forced to choose. Would we follow the way of love, unity, and Christ? Or would we let fear, greed, and division destroy us? The battle wasn't coming. It had already begun. If you've made it this far, I need you to hear me. This is not a coincidence. You weren't meant to scroll past this video. You weren't meant to hear these words and walk away unchanged. Because time is running out. I saw it. I felt it. And now I'm telling you, you have a choice. The world is shifting. The truth is being revealed. The blinders are coming off, and what's left is undeniable. Jesus is calling. But the question is, will you listen? Maybe you've felt it too. That unease, that sense that things aren't as they seem, that something big is coming. Maybe you've ignored it, pushed it away, told yourself you were imagining things. But you weren't. This message reached you for a reason. This is your wake-up call. Jesus wasn't just speaking to me in that vision. He was speaking to all of us. To you. To the ones who have been waiting for a sign. To the ones who have been searching for truth. To the ones who have been afraid to take the next step. But now, you can't say you didn't know. You can't claim you weren't warned. You've seen what's coming. You've heard the words of Jesus himself. And now, you must choose. Will you wake up? Will you stand on the side of truth, of justice, of love? Or will you turn away, pretending you never heard this? Because there is no middle ground. The time for lukewarm faith is over. The time for silence is over. This is it. So I ask you, right here, right now, what will you do?